We want a peaceful Thanksgiving this year. Maybe you should sit this one out. 7 words. No exclamation mark. No invitation to discuss. No explanation. Just cut. As if I were an unnecessary detail. A piece of furniture that didn't match the tone of their family dinner. I stood frozen in my office, my eyes still glued to the text from my mother, Ellen Dawson. It was 8:13 a.m., just minutes before I was about to step into the most important meeting of my career. I, Natalie Dawson, 33 years old, newly appointed vice president at a tech company in New York, was about to present a $6 million product strategy to the board of directors, and yet, those 6 words dismantled every ounce of preparation I had made, not because I was weak, but because they didn't come from a rival. They came from a family. My mother has always used phrases like my strong girl, my sensible eldest, only as a way to justify her unconditional favoritism toward Rachel, my younger sister. When I worked 3 part-time jobs to pay my tuition, they sent Rachel to a private school, living in a dorm with air conditioning and a chauffeured ride. When I bought myself a used Civic at 25, they gifted Rachel a brand new SUV at 16. The reason was always she needs to feel protected. And me, I needed to be seen. I used to believe, if I were patient, successful, well-behaved, then at some point, they would be just as proud of me as they were of Rachel. I used to think, if I could bring them honor, they would invite me to the table. I was wrong. Last week, I signed the papers for a log cabin in Lake Placid, the dream I'd been nurturing for 10 years. I planned to announce it at Thanksgiving as a surprise gift. I pictured my mother smiling, my father raising his glass, Rachel clapping for the accomplished big sister. But no, I wasn't invited. I was dismissed. I stared at the screen, my fingers moving slowly over the keyboard. No tears, no pleading. Just typed one word, enjoy. I didn't send it out of kindness. I sent it to end it. That evening, I stood alone in my apartment, the streetlights casting their glow against the window pane. I removed each piece of jewelry, took off the suit I'd worn for the most successful meeting of my life. But in the mirror, I didn't see a corporate leader. I saw a woman who had just lost her family and wasn't allowed to grieve. I looked into my own eyes, and for the first time, I said out loud, they don't need me, and I'm not going to beg for a seat anymore. I'm going to build my own damn table. My parents think they chose peace by cutting me out, but what they don't know is they just lost the one person who could keep this family together. Will they realize it? When everyone else chooses me, I make coffee. The water boils in waves, steam clouding the kitchen window. My hand trembles slightly, not from the heat, but from the cold. Cold from the inside, all the way down to my spine. Since I received that message from my mother, I still haven't said a word, haven't called back, haven't confronted her, haven't asked why. Not because I don't want to know, but because I already know. They didn't do it by accident. They did it on purpose. I unlock my phone, tell myself I'll just scroll for a few minutes before getting to work. But the very first thing that pops up is a post from Rachel. She's standing in my parents' kitchen, wearing the apron I bought my mom for Christmas 3 years ago. Emma and Jack are making cookies beside her. My dad, Charles, is holding up a camera, taking pictures of them all, while my mom stands behind him, smiling as if no one's missing. No one's missing me. I zoom in on every detail, hoping to see something. A 7th glass, an empty seat, a glance toward the distance, as if someone was thinking of me. Nothing. Not a single trace of me ever being part of that place. I laugh. A dry, hollow laugh that echoes in my empty apartment. No one hears. No one knows. I remember last year, the same Thanksgiving. I brought home an expensive bottle of red wine from Italy, the kind my mom once said she loved. She set it aside, opened a cheap bottle from the supermarket instead. Tom's not used to drinking strong wine. You understand? Right. I nodded. I always nodded. Then I washed the dishes, cleared the table, drove home in the rain, while everyone else was already asleep after dinner. No one saw me out. No one said, "Drive safe." And now, I'm crossed off from my own family's holiday with a message that's barely 10 words long. No one screamed in my face that I wasn't loved. They didn't need to. Their indifference was loud enough to choke me. I started to think that maybe I'd been living as a temporary guest in that house all along, always trying to be acknowledged, always sacrificing to be accepted. But no one acknowledged me, and no one needed my sacrifices. I opened my brown leather notebook, the one I always carry in my bag. I write the first line if I disappeared that day. Who would clear my half-eaten plate? No one. I think of the wooden cabin in Lake Placid that I just bought. I used to picture the whole family coming there to celebrate, staying overnight, drinking hot cocoa, laughing under the warm yellow lights. Now, I'll still have Thanksgiving, but no longer to please anyone else, only to see myself more clearly. Because after all, if I don't set a place for myself, I'll always be the one standing outside someone else's table. And if you've ever been the extra person in your own family, subscribe to Revenge Mark. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't come from hatred. It comes from loving yourself more than you ever did. 3 days later, the apartment was still quiet. No messages from my parents. No words of concern. Not a single call saying, "We should talk again." Only the low hum of the heater in the background, and my own breathing was thin, long, steady, as if I were holding myself together so I wouldn't shatter into pieces. I thought maybe I had gotten so used to being forgotten that I no longer expected anything. I stood in the living room, phone in hand, scrolling mindlessly. Another post appeared. Rachel. This time, it was a picture of her standing outside a holiday decor shop. In her hands was a box with a lit sign that read, "Family First." The caption was simple. "The most peaceful days are when you're with the ones who love you." I read that sentence over and over. The ones who love you. There was nothing wrong with that sentence. And there was nothing unintentional about it either. I suddenly felt my heart clench. It wasn't hurt anymore. It was clarity. A kind of pain that makes you stop wanting to wait for love. You start wanting to take back the part of your life you've let others hold for far too long. That evening, I pulled out an old paper map from the drawer, spread it out on the wooden kitchen table. An old habit from when I was a product design student. I've always needed to see things physically before I could build them in my mind. I circled one single spot in Red Lake Placid, the cabin I had just signed a contract for, a place that was supposed to be a family destination. Now, it would be my new beginning. For me, and for the people who choose to see me. The next day, I called Sophia, my cousin. We used to be as close as sisters. But over the years, the relationship faded with distance, work, and our families being just too different. I hesitated for a few seconds before pressing the call button. "Soph." Her voice came through the line, still warm as ever. "It's been too long. You're still alive." "Right." I let out a small laugh. The first in days. Still alive. And I'm thinking about doing something a little crazy. I told her everything. No hiding, no dramatizing, just telling it, as if I were drawing a boundary line right across my own heart. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "As far as I'm concerned, you've always been the only one in the family brave enough to face the truth." I pressed my lips together. She went on, "If you need someone to stand beside you in this crazy plan, then save me a ticket to Lake Placid. After that call, I made 3 more. Jordan, my cousin, Uncle Mitch, my uncle, and Aunt Judy, the one I've always felt understood more than she let on." No one asked, "Do your parents know?" No one mentioned Rachel. They only said, "Give me the address. Send me the flight time. Do you need me to bring anything I wasn't getting back at anyone by arguing over a text message?" I didn't tell anyone to their face that I was hurt. I just started inviting the people who truly cared to a place where I could be myself. And that's when I realized I didn't need to be invited in. I just needed enough courage to stop standing outside. That night, I wrote a note and left it on the table. Slanted letters, bold strokes. I'm not being excluded. I've simply walked away from a table that never had a seat for me in the first place. But I didn't yet know how Rachel would react when she heard the rest of the extended family was heading to Lake Placid, and whether she would just stand by and watch me reclaim the place she thought was permanently hers. The first morning I woke up in Lake Placid, the air was covered in mist, and it was strangely quiet. I stood on the front porch, coffee cup in hand, gazing out at the distant forest. No car sounds, no phone calls, no emails from the office, only the wind weaving through the pine trees and the sound of my own footsteps on the cold tile floor. I had never felt a place feel so much like home, and I had never been so afraid of that feeling. The fear wasn't because the house was too big or because I was doing something against my parents' wishes. It came from the question that kept repeating in my head, what if I fail? What if everyone I invited doesn't come? I had always been good at planning. At work, I anticipated every possible risk. In life, I was used to having no one to back me up, so I always had to plan twice as much. But this wasn't like any project I'd ever done before. This wasn't just about hosting a dinner party. It was about redefining myself in front of people who had always taken me for granted. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, wrote out the list, arrange the bedrooms, order decorations, plan the menu, prepare the formal invitations, double-check the seating, and most importantly, stay calm. That afternoon, Sophia arrived early. She walked in with an orange suitcase, a batch of homemade cookies, and that familiar warm look in her eyes. "Wow, you actually did it." She looked around the kitchen, then at the row of windows facing the lake. "This isn't running away, Nat. This is moving forward." I laughed. "I'm not even sure where I'm moving toward." "You don't need to know. Just don't go back." That sentence hit the very place I'd been keeping locked away. That night, we cleaned up together and rearranged the dining table. I brought out the ceramic plates I had bought on a work trip to Portland. Each one had a different pattern that was mismatched, but strangely beautiful when placed together. "I like these," Sophia said, arranging them in her own way. "They're like you. Not everyone matches, but when put in the right place, they make a picture." We worked while playing old jazz. There was a fleeting moment when I forgot I was preparing for payback. I was simply living, and for the first time, I didn't need anyone's permission to do it. The next morning, I got a text from Jordan. "We'll be on the road at 9. Want me to bring anything?" At the same time, Uncle Mitch texted, "Do you need extra pillows? Aunt Judy's sewing a few new ones." I looked at my phone screen, alone in the kitchen, still holding the coffee spoon. I hadn't stirred. My heart beat slowly, but deeply. I wasn't truly alone. I had just never given anyone the chance to stand on my side. At that moment, the gate buzzer rang. I walked out, and as if fate knew perfect timing, a package sat neatly at the front door. From Rachel. No note, no words, except the address. I brought it inside, opened it. Inside was a wooden picture frame A photo of the whole family at last year's Thanksgiving. I was standing on the far left, one hand holding a tray of food. No one was looking at me in the picture. In the bottom right corner, Rachel had written in silver ink, "Family is everything." I placed the frame face down, not out of anger, but because I no longer wanted to be the one standing on the far left. I never thought a simple email could make my heart race like this. Thanksgiving in Lake Placid, Thursday, 4 p.m. You're invited because you deserve it. Just one subject line. No long explanations. No conditions. No if or depending on. Just a simple truth: I choose you. You are invited. I sent the email to everyone who had ever truly seen me. Really seen me. Not the ones who always said, "You're so strong," and then left me to clean the kitchen alone. I sent it to Sophia, Jordan, Uncle Mitch, Aunt Judy, my old high school teacher, my college friend, and Tom. Yes, Tom, Rachel's husband. I'm not naive. I knew inviting Tom would stir the waters, but there's one thing I was certain of. He's the only one in Rachel's family who has ever seen me cry in the kitchen and didn't turn away. Sophia sat next to me, watching as I hit send. Are you nervous? I nodded. Not because they might say no, but because this is the first time I'm not waiting for anyone's approval. She didn't say a word. She just quietly placed her hand on my shoulder. The silence spoke louder than 1,000 words of encouragement. An hour after sending, I got my first reply. From Tom. We'd like to come. Rachel doesn't know yet, but I think Lila and Jack should see what a real Thanksgiving looks like. I stared at the words "we'd like to come," and I wondered, who exactly is we here, the whole family, just him and the kids, or was this the first time Tom was choosing a place without Rachel? Before I could reply, my phone rang. The caller ID lit up Rachel. I swallowed hard. Sophia looked at me. You don't have to answer if you're not ready. But I was ready, not to justify myself, but to listen and stand firm. I tapped accept. Rachel's voice came through, softer than I expected. I got a message from Tom. What exactly are you doing? Natalie. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone calm. Making dinner, with people who truly want to be there. A beat of silence. Then Rachel let out a short, sarcastic laugh. What are you trying to prove? Do you really think a bunch of old classmates can fill the gap of family that line? It hit a part of me, the part that had spent years straining to be seen as valuable in the family. But I wasn't the Natalie from last month anymore. They're not replacing anyone. Rachel. They're simply people who don't need me to disappear so they can feel comfortable. She didn't answer right away. It seemed my words weren't in the script she had prepared. Mom's really hurt. You know that I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. I know. Just like I was hurt when I was shut out of my own family. Rachel didn't argue. She only said, I'll think about coming, but if I do, you won't turn that dinner into a stage for criticism, will you? I paused for a moment, then answered, softly but firmly, no need to criticize anyone. Rachel, because sometimes just being there says it all. The call ended. I set the phone down on the table. My hands were still warm, not from anger, but because, for the first time, I held the right to define my own worth. That evening, I lit candles on the long dining table. A row of chairs was already in place, not arranged according to Mom's seating chart, not prioritizing important guests. Simply, anyone who wants to be here has a seat. Anyone genuine will always have a place. I didn't know if Rachel would come, but I knew one thing for the first time. I wasn't waiting for her to start. 2 days before Thanksgiving. The morning began with the smell of waffles and coffee drifting from the kitchen. Sophia was playing with Emma out in the yard. I stood in the living room, double-checking my preparation list. Jordan and his wife, Lisa, were due to arrive later that day. Uncle Mitch had texted, "Don't worry, I'm bringing enough wine for 3 generations." Everything was falling into place, until I got a text from an unsaved number. Just one sentence, "They're really angry, and not just about dinner." I stared at the screen. My fingers froze above the keyboard. No name, no emojis. Just one line was enough to send a cold shiver down my spine. It wasn't hard to guess who they were. My parents, Ellen and Charles. Could be Rachel. Could be all 3. And I knew this was no longer about just a meal. That evening, Sophia walked into the room with her iPad in hand. "You should see this." Rachel had just posted something publicly. "There are people who like to play the victim just to get attention, but everyone knows real family is where you're accepted, not where someone chooses who gets in." Below is an old photo of me clearing the table at last year's Thanksgiving dinner. I was there, but blurred out. Responsible, but invisible. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt everything tilting toward a place I could no longer control. That night, I was quieter than usual at dinner. Everyone else still laughed and joked, still asked me about the menu, still reminisced warmly about old times. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was about to blow up. I stepped out onto the porch, sat down on the steps. The cold wind whipped my cheeks, but somehow it felt more bearable than what I was holding inside my chest. Sophia came out, handing me a blanket. "You okay?" "Not sure." I forced a smile. "You didn't do anything wrong, Nat." I looked at her, my eyes stinging. But they don't care about right or wrong. They only care about who still controls the game. That was the moment I realized I had stepped into a war. And this time, the enemy wouldn't come with shouting, but with silence and social media. The next morning, I got a call from my father. I hesitated, but answered. "Natalie, it's Dad." His voice was low, edged. "What are you doing?" "Stirring up division in the family, dragging the whole bunch of relatives out to some house in the middle of the woods. Do you have any idea how your mother feels, seeing those pictures?" I kept my voice steady. "Dad, I'm just hosting a dinner, and I invited the people who truly wanted to be there. You've separated yourself from this family. Natalie, you don't get to play the victim and pull everyone to the side against us." I gripped the phone so tightly that my hand went numb. "I didn't pull anyone in. You pushed me out of the dinner first." A beat of silence. Then he gave a short, bitter laugh. "If you're going to keep doing things this way, don't expect to have a Christmas in this house again." I hung up, said nothing more. I knew this was a threat, and it was also their first counterstrike. But maybe they forgot one thing: I was already used to not being invited. Only this time, I chose not to show up. If you've ever been manipulated by silence or sugar-coated words, hit that subscribe button for Revenge Mark. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest roar of rage. Thanksgiving? The wind rustled through the pine trees in the front yard. The sky was misty, but not gloomy, just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you listen to yourself. I woke up early, brewed coffee, put on the cream turtleneck sweater my mother once gave me, back when she still remembered her first daughter's birthday. Not because I still held on to hope, but because I needed a reminder I was once chosen, even if it was only once. Sophia walked into the kitchen, her hair messy, holding a mug of tea. "Are you ready?" I smiled. "No, but I'll pretend I am." At 9 a.m., the first guests arrived. It was Aunt Judy, with Uncle Mitch, carrying a homemade apple pie and 2 bottles of hard cider. I hurried to the door. Before I could say anything, she hugged me tightly. "You make me proud. Natalie. Not because of this dinner, but because you no longer let anyone decide your worth. One by one, couples, families, appeared like a warm current flowing into a home that had been prepared far too long for this moment. Jordan, Lisa, my old college friend Mallory, with her little daughter. A former colleague from Nexus even came, despite having to fly for 3 hours. No one asked, "Do your parents know?" No one mentioned Rachel. They only asked, "What can we help with? Where should I put the pie?" You still kept Grandma's traditional stuffing. Right, I didn't need to hide my emotions, because for the first time, I wasn't reminded that I was being too sensitive. By midday, the house was full of laughter. The oven was warm and steady. Emma sat folding napkins with Lisa. Jordan played jazz on the small speaker. Sophia rushed back and forth like a backstage queen. I stood in the middle of the living room, wineglass in hand, looking at each face, and for the first time in years, I thought I belong here. At 3:47 p.m., a silver SUV pulled up in front. I knew that license plate. I knew the sound of the engine shutting off. I knew the way the car door closed softly, but intentionally. Rachel. She wore a long coat, hair neatly tied back, no elaborate makeup like usual. In her hands, a tray of cookies, and behind her, Tom, with the 2 kids. My parents were not with them. I went to open the door. "Hi," I said, my voice steadier than I had imagined. Rachel nodded. "Sorry for cutting it so close. That's all right. Everyone's happy you're here." No hug, no explanation, but none was needed. Only Jack ran up, wrapping his arms around my legs. "Aunt Natalie, can I sit next to Emma today?" I crouched down. "Of course, buddy." Rachel handed me the cookie tray, her eyes lingering on the tablecloth. "That's Grandma's pattern?" I nodded. "Yes. You remember, I thought Mom kept it. Grandma gave it to me in my last year of college. But Mom never asked." That sentence fell like a small pebble into a still pond. It didn't cause panic, but it made ripples that could not be stopped. Dinner started at 4:10 p.m. I stood to make a toast. Just a few simple words. No speeches. No need to score points. But when I said thank you for being here, for seeing me, everyone clapped. Not politely, but sincerely. I looked at Rachel. She looked up. And for the first time, she didn't avoid my eyes. She pressed her lips together, nodded, as if in acknowledgement. That night, while clearing the table, I overheard Emma asking Mom, "Can we come to Aunt Natalie's again for Thanksgiving next year?" I didn't hear the answer, but I heard Rachel's silence, brief. Then, of course. I kept thinking that once I managed to host a warm, cozy gathering, got the applause, and saw everything would be fine. I forgot that the peace of someone who's been cast aside is always a threat to the one holding control. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I returned to the city. In my mind, I could still see the long wooden dinner table, Emma and Jack running around, Rachel's eyes no longer condescending, but quiet. Something had begun to melt, or so I thought. But then, on Monday morning, as I opened my work email to start the week, I received a message from HR. Subject unusual review request from the executive board. I frowned, opened it. We have received an anonymous complaint regarding budget misuse in last month's internal event allocations. Please prepare the full personal expense report related to the above items. My heart pounded. I checked all the records, and everything was in order. Not a single cent wrong. But this feeling didn't come from suspicion. It came from familiarity. I called Mark, an old colleague from the finance department who had worked with me back then. Have you heard anything about this anonymous complaint? He was silent for a few seconds. Yeah, I've heard. And, Natalie, I don't know how to say this, but I gripped the phone tightly. Someone sent your credit card statement to the director. They said you used company funds to book a private flight for a vacation in Lake Placid. My throat felt like it was closing. I exhaled slowly, trembling. Mark, you know that's not true. Yeah, but Natalie, someone's really trying to hurt you. I hung up, rested my head against the window. The midday light streamed through, but it wasn't warm. I knew who. It couldn't be Rachel. It couldn't be my mother, Ellen. They wouldn't be cruel enough to destroy my career, would they? I opened my laptop, dug through the access history from the old email I had borrowed to send Thanksgiving invitations. An unusual IP address popped up on the very night Rachel left my house, after dinner. I couldn't be certain, but I also couldn't deny it. Someone had gone through my entire payment history and tried to build a story from scattered details. The next morning, I got a call from my mother. Natalie, are you satisfied now? I froze. You know about this. Everything has its limits. Dragging the whole family to your side, embarrassing Rachel, making your father angry, and now damaging the family's reputation. I stood up. My voice started to shake. I didn't do anything. My mother exhaled sharply. You always think you're innocent, but have you ever thought how many years other people have had to keep quiet because of you? I almost shouted, keep quiet because of me, or because I wouldn't play the obedient role you wrote for me. She paused. A heavy silence settled in between us. Then softly, she said, if you have any sense left, you should apologize and drop this little revenge game. Because if you lose your job, don't expect anyone to take your side again. I hung up, not because I was angry, but because my hands were shaking so badly. I couldn't hold the phone anymore. I didn't know who my mother had called. I didn't know if Rachel really did it. I didn't know who would still be with me when I no longer had value. But I knew one thing. If I backed down this time, for the rest of my life, I would only exist inside the mold someone else had made for me. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't live in the body. It seeps into every empty space inside you. When you walk through your home, touching every familiar object, yet you can't find yourself in any of them. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by financial reports, laptop open, unread emails, internal meeting schedules glaring in bold red lines across the screen. I knew. All I had to do was open my mouth, call Mark, send a written explanation, and I could handle this. But I couldn't bring myself to stand up. 33 years of living to be called the reasonable eldest daughter. And yet one vague accusation was enough to make the entire company tilt their heads and look at me as if to say, maybe she's not as perfect as we thought. I used to think betrayal came from strangers, but it didn't. It came from a message sent by the very person who once held my hand when I was in a college crisis. My mother. It came from Rachel's absolute silence since that day. It came from my father not calling back, not asking a single question. Not even, "Are you okay?" I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. The glass of water beside me had long since gone stale and cold. I sat there like someone completely lost, yet still wearing the mask of composure. I brushed my hair, folded the blanket. But inside, there was nothing. I opened my phone. No messages. I opened Instagram. Rachel had posted a story, a photo of the whole family sitting by the fireplace. Beneath it was the caption, "All the most important people are here." I slowly closed my phone. Not because it hurt, but it no longer surprised me. I had accepted it. Some tables will never have a seat for you. and some relationships only exist if you keep your mouth shut. That afternoon, it rained. I stepped out onto the porch, sat on the old wooden steps. No coat. The rain was cold. I let it hit my face, my hair, my wrists. I thought about one possibility. If I lost my job, lost my reputation, who would I be? A failure. A daughter who brought it on herself? A woman no one would choose anymore. I started crying. For the first time, not out of anger, not from being hurt, but from being afraid of myself, afraid that everything my mother had ever said was true, that I was too stubborn to be loved. I am too confident to need anyone to check in on me, that I had chosen solitude and now had to accept the cost. I felt myself shrink, no longer Natalie with some fancy title, not the host of a memorable Thanksgiving, just a child, sitting in the rain, wondering, why am I never good enough for them to stand by me that night? I got a text from a familiar number I heard. I don't believe it. It was Tom. I didn't reply. Part of me wanted to call him immediately, explain, and tell him everything. But another part was too tired. I just stared at those words and wondered, would anyone still believe me if I had nothing left to prove I stayed awake all night? Not to think about fighting back, but just to not fall apart. I wrote one single line in my notebook. If tomorrow I'm no longer the Natalie everyone knows, then what's left of me when daylight came? I saw my father's old coat hanging in the closet, the one he left behind the last time he visited this apartment. I touched it, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry, just sad. It was sad for a girl who had spent her life trying to live in a way that would make someone hold her, and for the fact that no one had ever learned how to hold her back. That morning, there was no rain, just cold. A dry cold that went straight into the bones, but not as biting as the night before. I sat on the sofa, holding my father's coat in my arms. A blanket was draped across my thighs. The room was silent. No music, no phone, no notifications. I wasn't crying anymore. Not because I'd grown stronger. It's just that. Even pain has its limit. And I had reached the very end of it. The phone vibrated. A missed call from Tom. A message from Sophia. I know you're keeping your distance, but don't stay lost in the dark for too long. Nat. One line. Soft. But like a hand resting on my shoulder in the middle of the night. I didn't reply right away. I got up, went into the kitchen, made coffee. I placed my hand on the wooden countertop, scratched and worn from years ago. I remembered the day I first moved into this apartment. No one came to help. No bouquet of flowers to say congratulations. Just me, cardboard boxes, and a quiet belief that if I'm kind enough, successful enough, they'll come back. I gave a small laugh. No bitterness now. I no longer believed that. No one is coming to save you. But there was someone who hadn't walked away. I opened Tom's message again. I don't trust them. And I know you didn't do anything wrong. I called him back. He picked up almost immediately. Natalie, are you okay? I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then I laughed, hoarse, but real. No, but I'm starting to know I will be okay. Tom let out a small sigh of relief. The kids are still talking about Thanksgiving at Lake Placid. Jack's been trying to fold napkins like Sophia showed him. I pressed my lips together, my throat tight. I don't know where things will go from here, but thank you for still believing in me. Always. The call wasn't long, but after I hung up, I stood and stepped out onto the balcony. The first sunlight after 3 gray days touched my cheek. A part of me warmed. I went back inside and opened my laptop. The screen lit up. The emails were still there. The warnings still hung over me. But this time I didn't avoid them. I opened the expense reports folder, created a detailed summary. I wrote a short, sharp explanation and attached every receipt. When I pressed send, my heart was still trembling. I knew this wasn't over, but I had chosen not to stay silent anymore. That afternoon, I cleaned the apartment, folded the things I'd left unfinished, lit an old vanilla candle that my mother used to love, not to hold on, but to close the chapter. I didn't know if my mother ever thought of me in one fleeting second between all the scolding words. I didn't know if Rachel had read the message I never sent. But now, I didn't need to know anymore. I am Natalie Dawson. I have been broken. I have lost everything. I once believed I had no one. And now here I am, writing down every truth in my own voice. Not to reclaim anything, but to remind myself I am still here and I am worthy. If you've ever hit rock bottom like I have, and still gotten up, even if it was just by hooking one finger on the edge of the bed, subscribe to Revenge Mark. Because the most beautiful revenge is when you live brilliantly, even after they've tried to bury you in silence. I wasn't making plans like someone who was angry. I no longer wanted to get back at anyone in the crude sense of the word. I was doing this as someone who had finally understood. There are things that need to end so that you can truly begin. A week after sending my written statement, I received a response from the internal audit team. No violations detected. Thank you for your transparent and professional cooperation. Not a single apology. Not a single acknowledgement that I had been unfairly put under scrutiny, but I didn't need it. Their silence no longer made me tremble. That very day, I requested 3 days off. I didn't give a clear reason. Not to run away, but to finally finish something I had owed myself for far too long. I went back to Lake Placid. It wasn't quite winter yet, but the air was cold enough that my breath turned to mist. The wooden cabin was the same, peaceful, standing there as if it, too, understood. I needed to return to where it all began to see how far I had come. I opened my old notebook again. The last entry was written after Thanksgiving. I turned to a fresh page, wrote the first line. This plan isn't to beat anyone. It's just to remind myself I am no longer powerless. I listed each step clearly and specifically. No emotions, no rush. Sell the city apartment. I no longer want to stay in a place that was once the shadow of my fear of failure. Transfer my work location to the New Haven branch. I once turned down that offer because I was afraid of not being close to my parents. Now, far enough to breathe. Close enough that if anyone truly wanted to, they could find me. Contact my personal lawyer. Not because I plan to sue anyone, but because I need someone to protect me as I walk on my own. Establish a small scholarship fund. The fund's name, the Unchosen Fund. For female students who were once the reliable ones in their families, yet never once made a priority. Every word I wrote felt like piecing back together the fragments of Natalie I thought had shattered in the rain that day. Not the old Natalie, not the quiet girl waiting for her turn, but the woman who knows how to choose herself first. That afternoon, I got a call from Rachel. I hesitated. I wasn't afraid to hear her voice anymore. I just wasn't sure I wanted to, but I answered. I heard you were cleared. Yes. A pause. I didn't know that was going to happen. I swear. I said nothing. Some things, if you have to swear to prove them. Maybe we've already been wrong from the start. She went on. Mom knows now, and she's getting ready to host Christmas like nothing happened. Do you think you will still come? I smiled softly. Not bitter, not sad. No. But if Mom wants to know why, you can bring her to Lake Placid. And if she's willing to sit down, say nothing, just listen. Then I'll be happy to make tea. Rachel was silent for a long time, before she finally said, "You've really changed." No, I've just finally had the chance to be myself. That night, I turned on the lights in every room of the house. No one was there. No guests. No specific reason. I just wanted to see every space I had created lit up, even if it was only for me. I stepped out onto the porch with a glass of red wine. There were no stars, but the light spilling from inside was enough for me to see my reflection in the glass door. I pressed my hand gently against it, whispered, "We're going to be okay." And this time, not because of anyone else. The day my mother called me back, I wasn't surprised. It happened while I was sitting in the backyard, sipping a cup of ginger tea, reading through an old diary I'd kept back in high school. On the very first page, it said, Mom said, "Don't speak too loudly. Natalie, you make people uncomfortable." I remembered that moment. I was singing a snippet of my favorite song in the kitchen while washing dishes. Just a minute of joy, and it got shut down. I was 15, and from that day on, I never sang in the kitchen again. When Mom called, I picked up. No pretending, no performance, just me. "Hi, Mom." She paused for a beat. Then, in a softer voice than usual, "Could you talk for a bit?" We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between her place and Lake Placid. Neutral ground, cold air, not easy to lie. I arrived first. Choose an outdoor table. Cold, but open. I needed space, because I knew this conversation wasn't just going to be about Christmas. When she arrived, she was wearing her familiar pale beige coat and the old pearl earrings. Still the same mom from my 5th grade days, holding my hand at parent-teacher conferences with that proud look on her face. Also, the one who later told me I should dress more plainly so I wouldn't make your sister feel small. I stood up, gave a small nod. "How are you?" "Mom, not really okay. I understand." We sat down. She ordered a latte. I ordered mint tea. Neither of us touched our cups. Only the steam drifted quietly between two women, a mother and a daughter, learning how to see each other again with bare eyes. Mom began. "I've been thinking a lot. About you. About what happened. I know. You're angry." I stayed silent. Kept my eyes on the edge of the table, not letting myself nod too soon. She continued. "I didn't think things would go this far. I thought you were just reacting, like always. That you'd come back, like before." I looked up. "Before?" "I came back because I didn't know I had the right to stand still." She looked startled. I didn't wait for her to object. "Have you ever thought that I'm not angry because you didn't love me, but because you loved conditionally?" Her breath caught. "I only wanted what's best for you." "No, you wanted peace for yourself. And because I was the compliant one, you put the weight on me without asking." A breeze swept across the table. The napkin on the tray nearly blew away. I held it down with 2 fingers, then let it go. She looked at me. For the first time, she didn't speak. Just looked. No defense. No performance. Only the eyes of someone who once thought she could control everything, now facing what she'd let slip away. "So, what do you want now?" she asked. I answered without hesitation. "I don't need you to apologize. I need you to understand. From now on, I will not live my life just to ease someone else's discomfort. Not even yours. No tears. No trembling voice. I've cried enough." She nodded. Slightly. That gesture. Lighter than the wind. But to me, it was an earthquake. We left the cafe without saying much more. No hug. No promises. Just one glance back from her as she got into her car, looking at me, as if she was rereading a book she once thought she had written. That night, I sat by the fire, wrote down the last 4 lines in the plan I had made back in part 11. I don't need you to choose me anymore. I have chosen myself. I don't need to return to the old table, because I have built another one, big enough for the truth. I didn't choose to confront them in the old living room, not at the dining table, not in the place where I was once dismissed as the troublemaker. I chose a place they couldn't avoid, the notary's office, a place where every word must be measured, where every signature carries consequences, and where, at last, I had the right to speak without being cut off. I arrived early, wearing a simple black sweater, slacks, no makeup, no bracelets. I wanted to show up as myself, unembellished, not making an impression, just Natalie, the one who survived. When my parents walked in, I stood, giving a slight nod. Rachel and Tom followed behind. The kids stayed outside with the sitter. The air was tight as a drawn bowstring. The secretary opened the door to the private meeting room, inviting each of us to take our seats. On the table lay the file I had sent 2 days earlier, request for transfer of family assets from party Ellen and Charles Dawson to party B, Natalie Dawson. My father opened it, frowning. "What? Is this about?" I sat upright. "My eyes are steady. This is what's been delayed for 10 years. Rachel looked at me, slowly. "You mean the house on Beacon Hill? The entire house, and the apartment over in New Haven. Everything the Dawsons once intended to split equally. Now I want to decide differently." My father's voice hardened. "You have no right to demand that." I nodded. "I'm not demanding, I'm presenting, and if necessary, I'll sue." The air slammed shut. My mother leaned back in her chair, her voice not loud, but sharp. "Do you realize this will make you, in the eyes of the family, a greedy person who destroys tradition? Aren't you ashamed?" I looked at her, direct, even. My voice is low. "No, because I've already been ashamed. The day you said, 'Let your sister have the main house, since you're single and won't need it.' And the day I stood outside Rachel's house in the rain, no one opened the door. And those 5 minutes you stood there, but never turned back." Rachel lowered her head, her hands tightening. Tom kept looking at me, silent. I pulled from my bag the financial statements for the past 15 years, proof of the money I had sent regularly into the family's shared fund, the one my mother always said was for your parents' retirement. I placed it in the center of the table. This is my contribution. I'm not asking for more. I'm not cutting anyone out. I'm simply claiming the part I built, the part that was stolen by silence. My father opened his mouth. "Natalie, this is family, not business." I smiled for the first time that morning. Family doesn't leave you sitting on the edge of a meal and tell you you're too sensitive. Family doesn't stay silent when you're being falsely accused. And family doesn't make you fake happiness just to keep up appearances. Rachel's voice caught you. "Really want to take it this far?" I answered slowly. "I want it to end. Not to win or lose, but so no one has the right to walk over me and call it love again." At the end, when the notary asked, "Would you like to discuss anything further before confirming the agreed terms?" I replied, "No." Because this time, I've read it carefully. No one signs on my behalf again. My mother stood. She didn't say a word. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. There was only that last look she gave me, not resentment anymore, just reluctant recognition. I stayed until the end, signing the papers. Tom placed a hand on my shoulder before leaving. He said nothing, but his eyes told me, "You deserve to stand in the center of this story." I thought that once all the papers were signed, I would feel triumphant, that there would be a cheer inside me, something bursting like fireworks. But no, it was just a quiet afternoon. I walked out of the notary's office. A light rain was falling. The wind swept through my hair, cold but not biting. Everything faded away like an ending without a final bell. On the drive back to Lake Placid, I didn't turn on any music. I didn't listen to a podcast like I usually do. I let the sound of the wind hitting the car windows be the background music, let my heart slow down, and face the thing. No one warns you about revenge is also a kind of loss. I didn't regret it, but I was sad. A sadness without a name, without a clear shape. Just the feeling that I had cut off a branch to save the trunk. Yet I could still hear the wind howling through the place where it once was. My mother didn't call back. Neither did Rachel. My father, I wasn't expecting him to. That night, I sat alone on the porch, looking out toward the distant woods where winter was quietly creeping in. I took a sip of white wine. Light, like the price I had just paid. Neither loud nor harsh, just seeping in, bit by bit. I checked the mailbox. There was an envelope. No return address. I opened it. Just a single sheet of paper, with a handwritten note you might win. But sometimes all people need is for someone to lose so they can love you. I recognized my mother's handwriting. I sat down. The paper was trembling lightly in my hand. I didn't cry. I just sighed. Maybe she was right. Maybe in her eyes, if I would just give in, bend, fade into the background like before, then love would find its way back. But what kind of love is that? The kind that has to fit into a coat someone else picked out for you. I burned the letter, not out of anger, but because I needed to keep space in my chest for something kinder. The next morning, I got a text from Tom Jack asked, "Why isn't Christmas this year like all the other years?" I didn't know what to say. I typed a reply, then deleted it, then typed again, because this time, no one's pretending anymore. I'm not sure if I'll be doing Christmas this year. Maybe I'll go to Vermont, rent a little cabin, bake, read, and listen to classical music. No big dinner. No, picking an outfit to match the family photo. No half-hearted compliments. Just me. And the silence. Real silence. That afternoon, I took an old photo out of the drawer. It was me with Rachel when we were little, in the backyard. We were both grinning widely, hair messy, hands covered in dirt. I didn't throw it away. I taped the torn corner back, put it in a new frame, and set it on my desk. Not to hold on, but to remind myself we once loved each other before the grown-ups taught us how to keep score. I won. On paper. Legally. In being seen. In being acknowledged. But deep down, I also lost. Lost part of my family. Lost part of my trust. And the innocence of believing that simply living well was enough to be loved. So that was the price. Not too high. Not too cheap. Just enough to remind me every time you stand up, you walk away a little further from the version of yourself you used to be. I moved into the small apartment in Vermont on the very day the first snow of the season fell. It's on the 3rd floor. Not spacious, but it has high ceilings. Beautiful light. The balcony faces a small lake. Every morning, a layer of mist settles over it like a thin scarf, reminding me that everything now is new. I brought only a few belongings, no more than what could fit into 3 boxes and an old red suitcase. A photo of me and Rachel when we were little. The knitted scarf my mother made back when I was in college. A small cactus Tom gave me is still alive, even though I've forgotten to water it a few times. I didn't make a big announcement about moving. I didn't post on Facebook. I didn't text the family group chat. I just let it all drift like snow. Quiet. Soft. Without a sound, yet changing the whole atmosphere. On my first morning here, I woke up at 6. No alarm. I stepped out onto the balcony, holding a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just the raw bitterness. And for the first time in years, I found it easy to drink. I began to write again. Not a complaint letter, not a plan, not a goodbye note. I wrote for myself. Short lines. Scattered thoughts. They didn't need to be beautiful. They just needed to be true. One day, I wrote this line, "I used to live as if I only had one chance to be loved. Now I live as if love is something I can plant." I stuck it on the wall, not to remind anyone, just to remind myself. Every week, I teach a soft skills class at the community center. The students are women of all ages, women who've been dismissed, who've lost their direction, who've forgotten the sound of their own voice. I don't teach them how to get revenge. I teach them how not to apologize for standing up. One late evening, Rachel called. I looked at the screen. No racing heartbeat, no trembling, just another ring, like any other call. I answered, "How are you?" "I'm fine." "And you?" "I'm the same." But I get it now. I didn't ask. Get what? Because sometimes letting someone walk through their own full circle is a bigger act of love than any explanation. She went on. The kids asked why they won't see Aunt Natalie this year. I didn't answer. But I told them about the time you held my hand crossing the stream when we were little, when I was afraid of the water. I smiled. Not because of the story, but because, despite everything that has fallen away, there is still one thing that has never completely disappeared: the memory of real love. I didn't go home for Christmas. I kept it for myself, made hot chocolate, watched an old movie I used to watch with Dad, turned on the radio. Instrumental jazz filled the little apartment. I didn't need to give back to anyone, because I had already taken back myself. No longer living just to be invited to someone else's table. I can set my own table. And if anyone comes, they come for me. Not for a role. Not for an expectation. Just for me. I am Natalie Dawson. I was once pushed out of the circle of family, career, and kinship. I was once called too hard, too blunt, too much. I once stayed silent, then I screamed, then I fell silent again, and in the end, I just had to listen to myself. Not everyone who betrayed me will ever understand. Not every loss can be repaired, but I no longer need that, because now I am enough, and that is the most beautiful victory I have ever had. Thank you for walking alongside the journey of Natalie Dawson from someone cast aside to someone who dared to rewrite her own fate. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs a reason to get back up. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Mark so you won't miss those quiet but fiercely powerful stories of revenge. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about gloating, it's about finding yourself again.